I don't know if it doesn't look likely. I would say basically two things about the report and all the public statements in general. Anything said in public, I would take with a grain of salt. It's spin. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right either. In other words, Hamas in particular has an interest in the psychological warfare that it's playing with the families of the hostages, with the population in Israel, which has an impact on a government where, of course, on the Hamas side, the Israeli spin has very little impact on Hamas because they're not answerable to anybody. Mm-hmm. Second, I would say that from personal experience in negotiations, the road to an agreement is not linear or even smooth curved. What I mean by that is that you don't make progress and progress and then come to an agreement necessarily. You can have situations of apparently major conflict, some of it just for show, some of it to harden a negotiating position. And then at one point or another, if both sides want an agreement, the two sides sit down and say, okay, this is what we've got, let's agree on it. The Ramadan deadline is both real and imaginary. In other words, Hamas will continue fighting during Ramadan. If necessary, Israel will continue fighting. Ramadan can be an excuse for an outbreak, and I think Sinwar is counting on that. That's part of his great gamble. But on the other hand, we're creating something of a self-fulfilling prophecy by saying, well, if there's fighting going on in Ramadan, then the entire Muslim world is going to erupt. We could find ourselves in Ramadan with fighting, and a portion of the Muslim world saying, hey, aren't we supposed to be erupting now? So I think that we're in a very dynamic situation. We should be watching it closely, but take it all with something of a grain of salt in terms of the day-to-day.
And what about potential imminent operation in Rafah? I mean, this has been also on the table that if nothing is close to being resolved with the hostages by Ramadan, the IDF indicating that they would continue, of course, with all of the humanitarian and need to try to evacuate 1.5 million people. Could this affect the IDF going into Rafah sooner rather than later?
It would affect it the opposite, later rather than sooner. The operation in Rafah is critical. It's part of the war strategy. If Israel truly wants to win and come out victorious against Hamas, it's going to have to go into Rafah and dismantle the 4 battalions there, as well as the 2 battalions still in the refugee camps in the central part of the Strip. That's for sure. If that doesn't happen, Hamas, for all intents and purposes, is handed a victory. Major victory, minor victory, a victory. If it doesn't happen before Ramadan, let me say this a different way. Mm-hmm. The offer not to do it before Ramadan is part of the negotiating stance in order to come to an agreement. So that's why I say later rather than sooner. It could be put off, but it's a question, in my opinion, of if and not when. As far as the humanitarian issue is concerned, Israel has tremendous interest in the humanitarian conditions. First of all, from a moral reason, we make no bones about it. The IDF works very hard to try to protect civilians, and I know this personally from personal experience, how much time and effort is put into planning, just from a moral perspective. Second, we also know that a humanitarian disaster aids Hamas in global public opinion, in the United States in particular. That doesn't work to our benefit. And last but not least, if we don't take care of the humanitarian needs in areas that are under our direct or even nominal control, for example, Gaza City, if we don't do it and nobody else does it, Hamas is going to fill the vacuum. So there's a strategic reason as well for us to be sure that humanitarian aid is getting in there, at least in the sense of preventing a disaster.